The Vanguard 9 research station hung like a jeweled pendant at the edge of wild space, rotating slowly against the backdrop of swirling violet nebulae. Its gleaming spires and crystalline observation domes were designed to impress, a testament to the combined technological prowess of the galaxy's most advanced species. Within its walls resided some of the brightest minds the cosmos had to offer. Specialists in xenolinguistics, quantum communication, and interspecies diplomacy. Among them was Dr. Mara Kells, a human xenobiologist specializing in organism communication. Her small office overlooked the vast containment chamber, where the station's newest visitor resided, unlike her colleagues, who boasted degrees from prestigious academies across 12 star systems. Mara's expertise came from decades of fieldwork, living among, observing, and connecting with species that others deemed primitive. Dr. Kells, your presence is required in Observation Room Alpha. The station's AI announced, its voice resonating through the space. The Directors' Council has convened regarding the Shadow Colossus situation. Mira sighed, gathering her notes. The situation, as everyone insisted on calling it, had begun 3 standard days ago when a Shadow Colossus had appeared without warning in the outer reaches of the system. The massive entity, part biological organism, part living darkness, had allowed itself to be escorted to the station, where it now resided in the isolation chamber. Every attempt at communication had failed spectacularly. The Shadow Colossus was the stuff of legend, an apex predator of the cosmic deep that most sentient beings only heard stories about. No one knew their origins or true nature, but their intelligence was undisputed. They moved through space without ships, communicated without technology, and survived in environments that would destroy any known life form. As Mara entered the observation room, she was met with the familiar sight of the galaxy's finest minds assembled around a holographic display of the creature. The atmosphere was tense, voices were raised. 12 cycles of quantum harmonic attempts, and still nothing, exclaimed Professor Irha, her crystalline form pulsating with frustration. As a luminari, she represented one of the oldest and most technologically advanced species in the galaxy. We've tried gravitational equations, crystalline resonance waves, encoded pheromone release, every established protocol for first contact. Colonel Ivan Strake, the station's military liaison, stood with arms folded across his broad chest. His cybernetically enhanced eyes never left the display of the creature. The deadline approaches. If we cannot establish communication within the next 36 hours, Command has authorized chemical neutralization. Mira felt her heart sink. You mean execution? The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. Director Zolon, a Tefrin whose skin rippled with bioluminescent patterns, regarded her with what might have been annoyance. Dr. Kells, we understand your perspective, but this is not one of your jungle expeditions. The Shadow Colossus is potentially the most dangerous entity we have ever encountered. Its presence here is unprecedented. If we cannot determine its intentions, we cannot risk. With respect, Director, Mara interrupted, stepping forward. Have we considered that our methods might be the problem? We're approaching this creature with our most advanced technologies, our most complex systems, and getting nowhere. Professor Irha's crystalline form chimed with what Mara had come to recognize as derisive laughter. And what would you suggest, Doctor? Should we draw pictures in the sand? Perhaps offer it a fruit basket? Several others joined in the laughter, but Mara held her ground. What I suggest is that we stop assuming complexity equals intelligence. Sometimes, the most profound communication doesn't require words or mathematical equations at all. Preposterous, huffed another scientist, a Vordanian with multiple limbs gesticulating in agitation. The Shadow Colossus is known to possess cognitive capabilities that rival our most advanced AI systems. Surely it would respond to sophisticated communication methods. Mara stepped closer to the observation window, watching the creature that had caused such a stir. The Shadow Colossus was difficult to describe. Its form seemed to both absorb and emit darkness, creating an outline that shifted and flowed like liquid shadow. Within that darkness, Occasional flickers of what might have been stars appeared and vanished. It moved with a grace that belied its massive size. Has anyone considered, Mara said quietly, that it might be waiting for us to stop talking at it and start being with it? Being with it. Professor Ira's tone was incredulous. What primitive nonsense is this? Colonel Strake checked his chronometer. We don't have time for philosophical debates. 35 hours remain until the neutralization protocol is initiated. I suggest you all return to your established methods with increased urgency. As the meeting dispersed, Mara remained at the window, watching the creature. Something about its movements struck her as deliberate, almost performative. Over the next several hours, she observed as her colleagues made increasingly desperate attempts at communication. The Luminari team projected complex gravitational equations into the chamber using precision gravity manipulators. The Shadow Colossus responded by altering its own mass distribution to create a perfect inverse of their pattern, then reorganized into what appeared to be a caricature of Professor Irha's crystalline form before dissolving back into darkness. The Vordanian linguists released precisely coded pheromone sequences designed to represent mathematical concepts. The Shadow Colossus absorbed the particles, then released them back in a pattern that, when analyzed, formed an exact replica of the Vordanian's nervous system, but arranged to depict what unmistakably resembled a creature sleeping. It's mocking us, Colonel Strake observed grimly as the pattern dissipated. No, Mara said, the realization dawning on her. It's mirroring us, and possibly, it's bored. Absurd, Professor Ira chimed. This is a creature of unfathomable intelligence. It wouldn't resort to such childish behaviors. But Mara couldn't shake the thought. She retreated to her quarters, reviewing everything known about the Shadow Colossus. The files were sparse, mostly encounters from a distance, observations of their movement patterns, and speculations about their role in the cosmic ecosystem. What struck her was that in every documented case, Shadow Colossuses avoided direct contact with other species. Yet this one had allowed itself to be brought to the station. Why? The answer hit her with such clarity that she nearly laughed out loud. It was curious. The apex predator of the galaxy was simply curious about them. The next day, tension on the station had reached a breaking point. 24 hours remained before the neutralization protocol would be enacted. The various scientific teams had exhausted their established methods and were now arguing over increasingly desperate measures. We could attempt a direct neural interface, suggested one scientist, though his voice lacked conviction. With what? Another countered. It doesn't appear to have a conventional nervous system. Perhaps a focused baryon beam to stimulate response, offered a third. That's not communication, that's poking it with a stick, Mara exclaimed, no longer able to contain her frustration. Director Zolan's skin flashed with warning patterns. Dr. Kells, if you have a constructive suggestion, we welcome it. Otherwise, please refrain from disrupting the proceedings. Mara took a deep breath. I do have a suggestion, but you won't like it. At this point, Colonel Strake interjected, we're open to unconventional approaches. Let me enter the isolation chamber, Mara said. The room erupted in protests. Director Zolan's skin flashed rapid patterns of alarm. Professor Irha's crystalline form vibrated so intensely that nearby instruments began to malfunction. Absolutely not, Colonel Strake shouted over the commotion. The Shadow Colossus could eliminate you in seconds. If it wanted to harm any of us, Mara countered, it could have done so long before reaching the station. It came here voluntarily. For what purpose? Director Zolan demanded. I believe it's curious about us. And right now, we're giving it a very poor impression of galactic intelligence by throwing increasingly complex and meaningless signals at it without ever attempting to simply be present with it. This is madness. Professor Irha chimed. You cannot seriously suggest that sitting quietly with the most dangerous predator in known space is a valid scientific approach to first contact. Mira looked around the room, at the faces and forms of beings considered the pinnacle of galactic evolution. Their expressions ranged from shock to pity to outright derision. Tell me, she asked quietly, How are your methods working so far? Silence fell. Colonel Strake was the first to speak. 23 hours until neutralization. At this point, Dr. Kells's approach, while unorthodox, poses no greater risk than our current stalemate. The Colonel is correct, Director Zolan conceded, skin patterns settling into a reluctant acceptance. However, we will establish strict safety protocols. At the first sign of hostile intent, we will extract you immediately. Agreed, Mara said, though she doubted their ability to extract her from a shadow colossus if it didn't wish it. Preparations moved quickly after that. Mara changed into a simple uniform without insignia or technology. No communicators, no scanners, nothing that might be perceived as a weapon or surveillance device. As she approached the chamber entrance, Colonel Strake handed her a small capsule. Emergency neurotoxin, he explained grimly. If things go wrong, bite down. It's painless and instantaneous. Mara pocketed the capsule with no intention of using it. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. The isolation chamber doors opened with a pneumatic hiss. Mara stepped through, hearing them seal behind her. The chamber was vast, its ceiling disappearing into darkness far above. The floor was smooth, featureless metal that reflected the dim lighting. And at the center, the shadow colossus waited. Up close, the creature was even more magnificent and terrifying than the images had suggested. It stood, if standing was the right word for its fluid posture, at least 4 meters tall, its form both substantial and ethereal. The darkness that comprised its body seemed to bend light around it, creating an event horizon of shadows. Within that darkness, points of light winked in and out of existence like distant stars. From the observation room, Mara knew her colleagues watched with bated breath, instruments recording every moment. She ignored them all, focusing entirely on the being before her. She walked slowly, deliberately to the center of the room, stopping several meters from the shadow colossus. Then, in a gesture that she knew would horrify the assembled scientists, she sat down cross-legged on the floor and waited. For several minutes, nothing happened. The shadow colossus remained motionless, its form occasionally rippling like dark water. Mara kept her posture relaxed, her breathing even. She didn't try to project thoughts or feelings. She simply existed in the creature's presence, open and unafraid. Then, with a fluidity that defied its massive size, the shadow colossus began to move. It flowed across the floor like liquid night, circling her position once, twice, 3 times. Mara remained still, though her heart pounded in her chest. On the 4th circuit, it drew closer. In the observation room, she knew alarms would be sounding, weapons systems charging. She hoped desperately that no one would interfere. The shadow colossus completed its circle and stopped directly before her. Then, in a movement that seemed to bend reality itself, it lowered its massive form to the floor. The darkness pooled and settled. And what might have been its head, a denser concentration of shadow within shadow, came to rest beside her knee. A collective gasp would have echoed through the observation room. The apex predator of the galaxy, the creature that had confused and resisted the most sophisticated communication attempts of the most advanced species, had just performed the equivalent of laying its head in Mara's lap. Mara remained still. Though her mind raced, the gesture was unmistakable across countless species, a sign of trust, of vulnerability freely offered. Slowly, giving the creature every chance to retreat, she raised her hand and held it palm outward above the darkest part of its form. The shadow colossus shifted slightly, raising what might have been the equivalent of its head to meet her palm. The sensation was indescribable, like touching cool water, static electricity, and the vacuum of space simultaneously. A tingling sensation ran up her arm, but there was no pain, no fear, only connection. Within that connection, no words or images were exchanged, but Mara felt something profound: curiosity, recognition, and what might have been amusement. The shadow colossus had been playing with them all along, watching their increasingly frantic attempts at communication with what she could only interpret as cosmic patience. For what might have been minutes or hours, they remained that way. The human woman and the cosmic predator, connected in silent communion. No complex mathematics, no quantum entanglement, no technological marvels. Just presence and mutual recognition across the unfathomable gulf of evolved difference. When Mara finally stood, her legs stiff from sitting so long, the shadow colossus rose with her, its form flowing upward like a tide of darkness returning to the sea. She bowed slightly, a gesture of respect, and turned to walk back to the chamber entrance. As the doors opened to readmit her, she glanced back once. The shadow colossus had rearranged its form into a perfect mirror image of her silhouette, before dissolving back into its natural state. The observation room was absolute chaos when she returned. Scientists shouted questions, instruments beeped incessantly, and multiple holographic displays showed replays of the encounter from different angles. "What happened?" Director Zolan demanded, skin flashing rapid patterns of confusion and excitement. "What did it communicate to you?" "How did you establish the neural connection?" Professor Irha chimed, her crystalline form vibrating with intensity. "What frequency did you use?" Colonel Strake pushed through the crowd, scanning Mara with a handheld device. "Are you injured? Compromised?" "We detected unusual energy patterns during the interaction." Mara raised her hands, silencing the barrage of questions. "There was no neural connection in the way you mean it. No frequency, no technology. I didn't speak to it, and it didn't speak to me, not with words or equations or any system you might recognize as language." "Then what was that display?" another scientist demanded. "It clearly recognized you." "It recognized me," Mara agreed, "as another conscious being worthy of acknowledgement, not because of my technological prowess or mathematical ability, but simply because I approached it as an equal, not as something to be studied or feared." "That's not science," Professor Irha protested. "That's mysticism." "No," Mara corrected gently. "It's biology. It's psychology. It's the foundation of all communication, the willingness to be present, to be vulnerable, and to recognize the other. Before we had quantum computers or gravitational equations, before we had written language or even spoken words, we had this, the ability to simply be with another conscious entity and find common ground in our shared existence." Director Zolan's skin had settled into thoughtful patterns. "And you believe this connection is sufficient to determine the creature's intentions, to ensure it poses no threat?" "I believe," Mara said carefully, "that it came here out of curiosity about us, and I believe it has now indicated a willingness to engage on terms that both it and we can understand. The rest will take time." "Time," Colonel Strake noted, checking his chronometer. "That we now have. I'll inform command that communication has been established and request suspension of the neutralization protocol." In the days that followed, Mara spent hours in the isolation chamber with the shadow colossus. No words were exchanged, no formal language developed, but a form of communication emerged nonetheless, a dance of presence and response, of mirrored movements and shared stillness. The scientific teams observed with growing fascination as the creature began to interact not just with Mara, but with the chamber itself. It manipulated light and shadow to create three-dimensional representations of cosmic phenomena, star systems, nebulae, gravitational patterns that no telescope had ever recorded. "It's showing us places it's been," Mara explained to the astonished scientists, "sharing its experiences in a way we can perceive." Gradually, other researchers were permitted to enter the chamber, though only after adopting Mara's approach of quiet, respectful presence. Professor Irha, initially the most skeptical, eventually became one of the most dedicated observers, her crystalline form resonating in harmonic patterns that the shadow colossus would mirror and elaborate upon. "It's not primitive at all," she confessed to Mara weeks later, her tone chiming with wonder. "It's beyond language, beyond our conceptions of intelligence. We were so focused on making it understand our methods that we never considered it might be waiting for us to catch up to its level of perception." The breakthrough came 2 months after first contact, when the Shadow Colossus created a display so complex and beautiful that it reduced the entire scientific team to awestruck silence. Using nothing but manipulated darkness and light, it constructed a real-time, three-dimensional map of dark matter flows throughout the galaxy. Information that had eluded the most sophisticated instruments and supercomputers for centuries. It's not just an apex predator, Director Zolan breathed, skin patterns pulsing with revelation. It's an observer, a guardian of cosmic knowledge. In the months that followed, the Vanguard 9 station was transformed from a research outpost to the galaxy's premier center for interspecies communication studies. The Shadow Colossus remained, now housed in specially designed quarters rather than an isolation chamber. Other Shadow Colossuses eventually appeared, drawn by some signal or knowledge that their companion had shared. Kells became known throughout the galaxy as the Connection Maker, the human who had bridged the gap between the most advanced civilizations and the most enigmatic beings in the cosmos. Her methods, once dismissed as primitive and unscientific, became the foundation for a new approach to interspecies relations. On the anniversary of first contact, Mara stood in the Grand Observation Dome of Vanguard 9, watching distant stars and the graceful movements of Shadow Colossuses as they danced through the void beyond the station. Professor Irha joined her, her crystalline form glowing softly in the dim light. "I owe you an apology, Dr. Kells," she chimed softly. "I was arrogant, dismissive of your methods because they lacked the complexity I associated with advanced thought." Mara smiled. "We all have our biases, Professor. Mine was assuming that sitting quietly on the floor would solve everything. Fortunately, we had a patient teacher." They watched as a Shadow Colossus approached the station, its form shifting into patterns of greeting that the entire staff now recognized. "Do you think we'll ever truly understand them?" Professor Irha asked. "Their origins, their purpose, the full extent of their knowledge?" "Perhaps not," Mara admitted. "But understanding isn't always about having complete information. Sometimes it's about accepting the mystery while still finding ways to connect." Outside, the Shadow Colossus performed a complex dance of light and darkness, a cosmic ballet that seemed to encompass both greeting and philosophical statement. Across the station, scientists of a dozen species watched in appreciation, no longer attempting to reduce the display to equations or linguistic structures, but simply experiencing it as it was meant to be experienced. A moment of connection across the vast differences of evolved consciousness. Mara placed her hand against the transparent dome, and light years away, the Shadow Colossus extended what might have been a tendril of darkness in mirror response. No words were needed, no complex technology, no quantum entanglement or neural interfaces, just presence, recognition, and the profound simplicity of two conscious beings acknowledging each other across the void. In the silence of that moment, Mara knew that true communication, true connection, had never been about speaking the same language. It had always been about the willingness to listen beyond words, to recognize consciousness in all its forms, and to approach the unknown not with fear or ambition, but with quiet respect. The apex predator of the galaxy had laid its head at her feet, not because she had conquered or tamed it, but because she had offered what even the most advanced civilizations had forgotten how to give: the simple gift of being fully present, without agenda or fear. And in that gift, worlds had opened. Colonel Strake appeared at Mara's side, his cybernetic eyes reflecting the cosmic dance beyond the dome. "Command has officially designated Vanguard 9 as the permanent headquarters for the Interstellar Communication Initiative," he announced. "They're sending representatives from 17 systems for training in your methods." "Not my methods," Mara corrected gently. "I just remembered what we all knew before we became so enamored with our own advancement, that before words, before technology, before mathematics, connection begins with presence." The Shadow Colossus outside the dome shifted its form, creating a pattern that resembled a spiral galaxy in miniature, stars and darkness flowing in perfect harmony. Within the spiral, tiny points of light clustered together, forming what unmistakably resembled the silhouettes of different species standing side by side. It's showing us the future. Professor Ira chimed softly. What we could become if we remember what you've taught us. Mara shook her head, smiling. What it taught us, she corrected. I was just the one willing to sit down and listen. As if in response, the shadow colossus expanded its display, the spiral growing to encompass the entire visible field beyond the station. Within that cosmic canvas, countless points of light moved in harmonious patterns, a dance of consciousness across the vast expanse of space and time. A dance they were now, finally, invited to join. Director Zaylon joined them, skin patterns reflecting the celestial display. We've received word that the Galactic Council has approved funding for a fleet of new research vessels designed specifically for Shadow Colossus interaction. They're calling it the Kells Initiative. Mara laughed softly. I hope they focus less on the vessels and more on the training of the crew. The most sophisticated ship in the galaxy won't help if the people inside it still believe complexity equals superiority. We've learned that lesson, Director Zolan assured her, patterns shifting to indicate sincerity. Each vessel will carry representatives from at least 7 species, including humans, and the first training module will involve sitting quietly in a room with nothing but their own thoughts for company. Many will fail that test, Colonel Strake observed wryly. Then they'll keep practicing until they succeed. Professor Irha chimed. Some lessons are worth learning, no matter how many attempts it takes. Outside, the Shadow Colossus concluded its display with a final flourish. A perfect representation of Vanguard 9 station cradled in what appeared to be protective darkness. Then it streaked away, a living shadow against the cosmic light, disappearing into the depths of space on business of its own. Mara watched it go, feeling neither sadness nor concern. It would return when it wished to, or others would come in its place. The connection had been established. The door opened. What would follow would unfold in its own time, at its own pace. In the meantime, there was work to do. Preparing the galaxy for a new kind of communication, a new understanding of intelligence that transcended technology and embraced the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. She turned from the dome, facing her colleagues, beings from across the galaxy who had become friends, collaborators, fellow students of the universe's most profound mystery, the nature of connection itself. Shall we begin? She asked simply. And in a chamber no longer divided by species or rank or preconception, they did. The apex predator had taught them how to listen beyond words. Now it was time to share that lesson with the stars.